Can't quite believe it, but there you are. We're on day 5, and I'm going to be talking today about working with mirrors and veils. So I'm going to be talking about the practice of Sangha from these 2 perspectives. So firstly, by looking at more detail about what I'm describing as the mirror of the relational field of Sangha, and then to try and have a look at what becomes visible in that field, in that mirror. So today I'm going to be returning to this view that what can become visible in the mirror of Sangha are the veils that limit and distort the natural, non-dual responsive state, which is the goal of practice. Before I go into this territory, I just want to give a quick wave to Akshobhya, because today we're arriving in the blue day, the day of descent into how things are. And the wisdom of Akshobhya, as you probably know, is described as mirror-like. It's able to distinguish between what is real and what is obscuring. And the wisdom of the mirror is to open like a dark blue ocean surface upon which all appearances can blossom and dissolve without the nature of that blue ocean being disturbed or shaken. And for me, this is the ideal of the Sangha, is to live within and of the world and share this sense of being unshakable in the face of so much turbulence. Because we live with a sense of the strain of living in relation to an unknowable future. And we feel in us the reverberations of our past. And yet right here, we have something that we can rely on, this clear mirror of awareness as the refuge, as the perspective from which we can know the world. So this mirror arises as the wisdom that's like water. When it's not shaken by the world, it reflects everything just as it is. It naturally becomes a mirror in which an experience is seen as it actually is, if it hasn't been made to tremble. It's able to meet and know and reflect appearances just as they are, without needing to make them any different. So this is the invitation. This is the invitation of practice to trust that awareness is self-liberating. This is the deep, dark blue ocean, undisturbed, always vaster than the worldly winds, creating waves upon its surface. And the wisdom of Akshobhya is associated with the heart. It's the open meeting place of a responsive radiance and an opening into a receiving of luminosity into our somatic field. And this is the mirror-like wisdom that arises and opens into Akshobhya's realm. And Akshobhya's realm you might be already know, but I enjoy knowing that Akshobhya's realm is named Abharati. It's called the joyous realm. So Akshobhya's realm is the realm of joy. And I feel this is significant because it points to this title for the retreat, which is Joy in the Cremation Ground. So that was a little wave to Akshobhya, and I'm imagining that we'll hear more about Akshobhya tonight from Taranita. So one of the capacities of this mirror of Sangha is to see with greater clarity the veils. So what are these veils? So these are the habitual ways of being and responding that are carried in our mind and body, that sift and edit our ongoing sensations and experiences by interpreting, giving form and story to our bare sensations. And the role of these veils is to filter and respond to sense experience to keep them manageable, to ensure our physical and emotional safety, as well as maintaining views about who we are and who we aren't, and what the world is and isn't. So these processes are described as veils because they limit and distort what and how we perceive. They're reductive, which means we tend to only see that which we already know or expecting to see in ourselves and our environment. So if we're serious about liberation, it's crucial that we see deeply into these aspects of our human life and seek to see them clearly, bring them into the field of awareness without grip or resistance, so that they no longer control or define our unfolding life. So the Buddhist term for this process of setting up, moulding or replicating set patterns of perception and response are called in Buddhism the samskaras. And they're often unique ways of knowing and interpreting and responding through our body and mind. And we should recognize that some of these responses, of course, are helpful, but unfortunately some less so. So my suggestion is that by practicing within Sangha, we establish this mirror that offers us the capacity to notice our internal responses whilst in the process of communicating, listening and being with others. Because this is really when we can notice when a samskara has been activated. So the intention is simply to see them clearly and in that way remove the power they have over us so that they don't define and limit our potential, our relational life. So as I said yesterday, this is helped by establishing a sufficiently broad attention which can encompass inner and outer experience and establish this sense of the liminal space in which everything is emerging and dissolving. So we need this breadth to our sensitivity in our relational life. Everything here is emerging and dissolving. We need this breadth to our sensitivity because the veils are often so difficult to separate out from the experience that they are filtering. They're often, unfortunately, unconscious, woven into how we see and respond to what we describe as ourselves, each other, and the world. So just for completeness, I'm going to say that these veils are also affected. It's actually the more traditional term, the veil, the kleshas there, as they're called. So the kleshas is actually a more direct translation of veil. But kleshas are more the general terms for the various categories of mental states and bodily responses that our human life can become over-identified with or lost to, afflicted by. So we have the familiar list of greed, hatred and delusion, which is seen at the center of the wheel of life. But there's also the kleshas of conceit, pride, wrong view, doubt, torpor, restlessness, shamelessness and recklessness. So you can probably recognize that within this list, the 5 hindrances from meditation instruction, but the kleshas are really, they're just general categories, more like highlights or headlines. They're pointing towards the specific, the general nature of the samskaras, which are manifesting with us in very innumerable, subtle and unique ways. So the question I have this morning is, how are these specific and personal samskaras, how are they formed? What are their function? and how can we free ourselves from their binding influence. So the first thing I want to say is that these veils are completely normal. They are integral to the human condition. And we all develop and grow and fall prey to our familiar and particular samskaras and the various categories of klesha. And these veils are formed by our ancestral and karmic patterns of engagement with life, which I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, but they're also here created in this life. Since we've been here, formed in our mother's womb, through the process of birth, into infancy, into adolescence, into adulthood, we've been building and negotiating relations to the world around us and the world within us to ensure safety and survival of something that we actually can't quite define, but we can sense it as our essential nature, and we literally protect our essential nature with our life. The early formative years of our life have a particularly powerful impact on our ongoing relation to our body, our self-expression, and how much or how little we trust the environment, each other, and ourselves. These veils, they carry and maintain the stories that are created as we try to make sense of the forces at play within and around us. We are here establishing the narratives in order to keep ourselves secure and even just to survive in an often confusing, disorientating, and even violent environment. No matter how well our intentions are of our carers or how benevolent the surrounding culture, these veils will establish themselves, will be created. So I want to stress that these samskaras, they're quite natural consequence of being here in this body, in this world. We can't banish them, we can only see them more clearly. In fact, I'd like to go further than that. I'd actually say that these samskaras should be honoured. We should express our gratitude to these patterns that have ensured our survival. They may feel like a heavy burden, and they are records of all that we've had to do to survive, to ensure our safety. The samskaras have been our protectors. So I really want to stress that. Feels important to just pause there and honour our samskaras. They have brought us to this place. They have protected us. So I'll continue. And it feels important also to include this growing understanding that the complexity of bringing visibility to these veils, the samskaras, is compounded because as we've grown up, all of us will have encountered some events or experiences that we've found so threatening, challenging, or confusing that we were unable to receive and process those particular experiences. And the effect of these types of experiences are termed developmental or relational trauma. I want to just say again, it's quite normal, it's just human, and this is something we will have all experienced. And I want to say it's distinct from what is described as severe trauma, which are unfortunately these dreadful experiences that some people go through of sexual abuse, life-changing accidents, or maybe unexpected tragedies, which thankfully not all of us have to bear. But we all carry relational trauma. And what's important to understand that all trauma sets up very deep and invisible patterns in our physical and emotional body. And they're invisible to us because the unprocessed pain of trauma, it soaks unseen deep into the physical and emotional body to protect us from what we couldn't process at the time. And these unprocessed events continue to be invisibly reactivated, reenacted, until such time that we can allow them back into consciousness with kind and patient awareness. And this is how the veils are transformed, so that we don't act from them blindly. So I want to stress in relation to the samskaras, they're not something that we banish. We cannot banish this cellular level to our experience. Now, more severe trauma, we want to acknowledge it does need professional help to allow it to be safely brought back into awareness. But what I'm talking about here, relational trauma, it will gradually open back into consciousness as our capacity to contain and hold our experience in kind awareness develops. And our aim is to allow these deep patterns, these core samskaras, to flower but not act out of them. We can notice they're arising, and we can gradually learn to hold them and become less identified with them by firstly just seeing them, holding them in this welcoming and safe container of open awareness. This field beyond right and wrong. So our access to this territory is always through the somatic field. The samskaras are carried in the body, and they become visible, particularly when they get activated, but they may be very familiar and simply be what we imagine we are. We can become identified completely with a pattern carried in the body, which was created by as a survival strategy and now lives in us. And we may have come to believe that this armor or the defense is actually an integral aspect of what we call me. So, note of caution, I realize I'm talking about very sensitive material. So in working at this level of our experience, I want you to know it's crucial that we first establish sufficient resilience to bear this somatic unfolding. And metta is crucial to this work. Patience and also the capacity to self-soothe in whatever way we can find. These are important foundations for working the samskaras on this somatic level. And one very useful capacity is to nurture the ability to pendulate. So pendulation is this capacity to move in close to a particular experience, a particular sensation, but with sufficient sensitivity so that we can feel if we're beginning to reactivate the pattern that is held within that sensation. If we can bring that sense to, if we are beginning to get activated, we're then able to pull back into the broader holding capacity of awareness itself. So we simply withdraw back into that fuller overall sense of the body, the somatic field. And like a pendulum, we can move towards and move away. And the pivot point for this work is kind, patient awareness. The pivot point is the unshakable mirror, the mirror-like qualities of Akshobhya, seeing without becoming over-identified or swamped or alienated from our experience, just as it is. So, where it's quite dense what I'm offering this morning, so I thought it'd be apt to summarize what I've been saying. So our samskaras are attempts to create stability, safety and meaning in relation to this apparent chaotic and fear-inducing nature of being alive. The samskara should be honoured with respect and gratitude because they've ensured our survival. And not all samskaras are limiting, as long as we learn to simply hold them in awareness without becoming over-identified with them or lost within them. I then said that some events in our life, as they happened, have felt too painful or potentially overwhelming, and so they've sunk without processing invisibly into our physical and emotional body. And these moments when we've been unable to process our experience drop into the soma as a means of protection and survival. These submerged experiences are affecting our whole psychophysical organism. This is described as a relational trauma, and these are the most difficult things to work with in awareness because they're so often acting on us invisibly and can often only be seen through the effects of how our life is unfolding. So it's important that we gently come to know these veils because they will be impacting on all aspects of our life, including our capacity to step fully into our potential and move towards freedom. So I'm going to end, I thought it'd be useful just to give you an example from my own experience as a way of kind of concluding this talk. So just before I do that, I really want to stress, I don't know why this morning I'm really feeling this need to stress that the veils have been here to keep us safe and ensure our survival. So we're seeking out these veils as an act of gratitude. We're thanking them for our protection in the there and then, whilst recognizing that we may not need to be bound by them in the here and now. So this is my story. So in the centre team recently, we were discussing how best to serve the Sangha in these complex times. And I felt inspired to offer to lead this retreat. And I decided almost immediately that I wanted to offer 7 talks on the relational life. I did this because I could feel that this was a real opportunity to share that which I'm most passionate about. It felt like a really rare and precious opportunity to step more fully into my life, to try to share my personal vision of the central importance of the relational life to spiritual practice. I felt a really strong call to stand up and risk saying, this is my experience, this is what I value, this is what's most precious to me. Now, perhaps inevitably, during this, to be here leading this retreat, I had to listen and engage with strong differences of views about the content and the language that I was proposing to use, because it was felt to be unfamiliar and possibly confusing for the Sangha. And it was also suggested that what I was proposing maybe wasn't suitable for a Sangha retreat. So I had to listen and engage with these differences. However, for some reason, on this occasion, I felt sufficiently resourced to step forward towards this challenge and honour that which is alive in me. It may be this is because death feels close by these days. In this silent space, just want to honour those who are extremely ill, those who are suffering. I want to take this opportunity to step fully into my life because it feels ever more finite and diminishing. So, remembering that the veils are there as protectors, they began to manifest to keep me out of imagined danger. So as I was preparing for this retreat, these veils, they began to take their familiar form of a brutal inner critic. Now, most of the time I can catch this voice, but on this occasion, the critic became all that I was. I just knew that I knew nothing. I had no grasp of the Dharma, and all that I will ever be able to communicate is platitudes. So maybe I should just stop now before it's too late and I humiliate myself. Every sentence that I'd written as I read it back just seemed to turn to ash. And all the piles of books surrounding me were growing bigger and bigger as I was filling them with scraps of paper, marking out all these nuggets of wisdom that other people had written that I was trawling for, and yet I could find no base from which to make use of them. So I swept into this complete state of panic and overwhelmed by this fear of humiliation. I was terrified of being found out, of being a charlatan dressed up as a Buddhist. So as you can hear, my veil, this particular veil, was certainly well activated. And of course, I'm trying to remind you and remind myself that this veil was trying to protect me from the anxiety of trying to live my own life, stepping out from the shadows of some imagined authority that was always held by the other, by someone else. And I felt in me an overwhelming need to go passive and simply withdraw. But the veils continued to play out, and on one particular day I was struggling to get a few sentences out, and then all I could do was just go and watch videos on YouTube. So endless clips of the best car chases from my favourite films, highlights of rugby matches, and I have to say, endless American TV channels analysing the political situation in America, which I became completely obsessed with. So, into the night, this process continued, and I could feel its ancient roots. Somewhere amongst all this, I recalled, not for the first time, a couple of memories. I'm just going to share one of them, which came back to me through meditation some years ago. and kind of came back to me during this night. I remembered how I learnt to survive. I remembered the sense of being desperate to get to my mother's breast. The sensation of scrabbling and searching for the nourishment that I craved and needed. And whenever I struggled to find my way to my mother's breast, she would push me away. And I could really feel the rage and the desperation, the will to survive in my body, propelling me back into trying to reach the breast, and again being pushed away. And somewhere in that process, I learned, maybe simply through sheer exhaustion, that if I went completely passive, I would be given the breast. I learned that my energy was too much for my mother. My life force was too much for my mother. So I had to suppress this in order to survive, to be nourished and not abandoned. I had to not express myself, not show my energy, not show my life force. So on some level, I'm often working at this edge in myself. Do I have to hide who I am to gain the nourishment of intimacy, or seeing in me that I deeply distrust? Do I have to hide who I am to gain this nourishment of intimacy? Can I see in me that I deeply distrust that it's possible to be myself and survive? I'm always concerned that at some point I will be abandoned to starve if I step fully into my life and express who I am. So I recognized in the night that this patterning established in my early life was still playing out here and now, as I struggled to express who I am and what is most precious to me. So as a chair of this center, as a human being, my deepest desire is to live out of spontaneity, arising out of trust in the well of kind awareness. And I wish that for you. I want us to live out of our creativity. I want us to work patiently with all the pushing and pulling, our differences, our ambivalence, and our commonality, to allow ourselves and each other to become fully embodied in connection with each other in all our complexity, and express our natural joy of being here in this precious life. A poem to end by Pesha Gertler, The Healing Time. Finally, on my way to say yes, I bump into all the places where I said no to my life, all the untended wounds, the red and purple scars, those hieroglyphs of pain carved into my skin and bones, those coded messages that sent me down the wrong street again and again. Where I find them, the old wounds, the old misdirections, I lift them up one by one, close to my heart, and I say, holy, holy. Thank you for that opportunity to speak. I feel blessed. Thank you.